Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's event with the Toni Morrison Society and Thornwillow Press. My name is Dana Williams, and I have the pleasure of serving as president of the Toni Morrison Society. And I am also a faculty member in the Department of English at Howard University. I also just happen to serve as dean of the graduate school. It's such a pleasure to be with you always, members of the Toni Morrison Society, and who we hope will be future members of the Toni Morrison Society. Tonight's event is one that we think is really special, and special for a number of reasons. Few people were more eloquent and deliberate with words than was Toni Morrison. Hear these words from Morrison as editor at Random House Publishing Company to an author, Barbara Chase Rabeau. The letter opens, "Dear Barbara, sorry about the confusion." And then in the third paragraph, it reads, "About the layout though, I haven't been able to talk to the designer this afternoon, but will soon about your request. We've talked about every detail of the book. I never worked with a designer who was such a perfectionist. You are not the French lady poet, he is. In any case, I did not send you a cover, only the title page. The cover will be long time coming. I think he can switch the ornaments though. He chose the one, he did, because it was a Chinese silk screen pattern, which he showed me because I thought the one I had chosen was not Eastern enough. So much for my French and my artistic sources. The books you liked, Fire, Savage, are both Random House books with designs by us. So no fundamental rupture seems likely. Okay about the ampersand and your name with the B initial. After I've spoken to the designer and tell him that you once belonged to his guild, I'll watch his convulsions, wait for his recovery, then propose the title change you have asked for. You may know well that the person who does the interior design does not do the cloth or the jacket cover. There's room for much divergence in style, which I will try to close. About the Visa display type, okay for a cover, but too heavy for a title page. We'll let you know much more about the masculinity and sexiness you want us to produce. Thanks so much for taking care of the address book thing. And then it goes on to talk about some personal matters. My point in reading this excerpt from this letter from Toni Morrison to Barbara Chase Rabeau is to remind us that Morrison loved all things beautiful. She loved to design books. She loved to design covers, and she worked with authors and with the design team very carefully. It's all the more appropriate, of course, then, that we share some time with you to talk about the making of one of Morrison's books as a beautiful thing. I'm so pleased tonight to have with us Howard Rambsy, who is the archivist for the Toni Morrison Society, and Carolyn Denard, who is the founder and board chair of the Toni Morrison Society. We're also joined by Luke Pontifell, who will tell us a lot more about the Thornwillow edition. We have to say a special thanks to the team at Thornwillow who pulled this event together with us rather beautifully and wonderfully. You'll see some wonderful images over the course of the evening, and we hope that you will be inspired to think not just about beautiful words and beautiful books, but how those books are made. Thank you so much for joining us. Howard, please take it away.
Okay. Welcome to everybody here today. It's so good to see you all or to know that you are here. I wanted to say that we have at least two major communities kind of converging today. On the one hand, we have members of the Toni Morrison Society here with us. And at the same time, we have people who are very interested and invested in book publishing and editions of books. And so those communities are here. And in some ways, if you're a Morrison scholar, I guess you're both of those communities in one. What we're going to do today is first have some comments from Carolyn Denard, our president of our founder of the Toni Morrison Society. And we're going to then have Luke Pontifell say a few words. So, Carolyn, could you get us started?
Thank you, Howard, and good evening, everyone. I'd like certainly to welcome the members of the Toni Morrison Society who are here this evening and all of the book lovers from all over the world. I hear we have a national and international audience tonight, so I'm very happy to welcome you on behalf of the Society, and we are certainly happy to be collaborating with Thornwillow Press on this presentation. Since Morrison's death, we like to think that we are in the legacy stage of our work at the Toni Morrison Society. And so I think that those of you who read and study Toni Morrison know that she is certainly a Renaissance woman, novelist, teacher, scholar, editor, and we are finding out more every day. And as Dana's reading shows, a real connoisseur of the book itself. And so we have been doing virtual presentations. We have been contributing and working with others. But this tonight is one of those places where we can go to the material, the tangible, the artifact that Morrison loved so much. Before I turn this over to Luke, I want to tell you just a little bit about the Toni Morrison Society, particularly for those of you who don't know our work. The Society was founded May 28th, 1993 as the 41st Author Society of the American Literature Association. And since that time, we started the Society, I like to say, in May of 1993, and then 7 months later, Toni Morrison won the Nobel Prize. And of course, our work then catapulted into an international undertaking with the first African-American woman to win the Nobel Prize. And we have been really working joyfully to live up to that legacy ever since. Our programs for the Toni Morrison Society include our Biennial Conference series. We've had 7 biennial conferences that really pattern Morrison's life. This one you're looking here, Toni Morrison in the American South, was our first conference. We moved there to Toni Morrison and the Meanings of Home, to Lorraine, and Toni Morrison in the Politics of Learning, to Howard, where she went to school, and then to Paris, and back to New York for editing, and many other conferences in between. But the International Conference the Biennial Conference was a signature program of the Toni Morrison Society. We have also had ALA panels. We are an official member of the American Literature Association, and we plan panels at the American Literature Association each year. We have roundtable discussions at the American Literature Association. And every 2 years, we do a Toni Morrison Book Prize for both the best author and the best editor of a Toni Morrison book. And I'm happy to say that we also have launched the Young Readers Circle. And this is not just to have young readers read Toni Morrison, but really to get them into the understanding of reading metaphorically, reading figuratively. And Toni Morrison certainly, as also a children's author, she has been able to supply those young readers with good books to read even at their early ages from 9 to 13. We've had international symposia and tributes to Toni Morrison. We are now working more to do virtual programs. Our signature program most recently is the Bench by the Road Project, which is an outgrowth of Morrison's own sense of the ways in which books become sites of memory. And she said, she lamented that there was no place where you could go and remember the presences and the absences of slaves. And certainly one of the signature quotes from that was, "There's no small bench by the road." And we took Morrison at her word on that and met it as a challenge. And we have since launched the Bench by the Road project and placed 30 benches in the US, the Caribbean, and Europe that mark important sites in the African diaspora. This one was our first bench placed at Sullivan's Island, and we are crossing the pier there to go and place our first bench on that recognized where the first slaves came into the US. We've done a lot of fun things. We've had the birthday celebrations. This was her 70th birthday party in New York at the New York Public Library. We did a birthday party for her at the 80th at the Library of Congress. And so we have tried to celebrate Morrison both for her professional work and also her personal life. And finally, I just want to say that, and to reiterate, that we are now into the legacy stage of our work. So we are holding tributes. We did a tribute in Atlanta for Toni Morrison in February of 2019. We did a tribute to Toni Morrison in August on the anniversary of her death. And tonight is another program where we are looking at the legacy of Toni Morrison. And I'm very excited about the focusing on the book, certainly the beauty of it. But I can remember conversations that I had with Morrison, much like what Dana was reading, and she was talking about love and how many takes they had to do of that, of the cover, the dust jacket, because she kept changing and making sure that the color was just as she planned, just as she wanted, just as she envisioned. And so the cover on Love Now, I look at adoringly because I know how much work went into choosing that. It's really a joy to hold because I know the intense energy that she gave to choosing that book. She would do this as Dana suggested. She'd send books back, she'd send the covers back, change it, it has to be. So the wonderful thing about this is Morrison had a vision, an idea for the book, and that it needed to be beautiful and it needed to be just right for the message. And so we are so pleased to add this program tonight to our legacy work, to work that celebrates Morrison's love for the artifact itself, and that it be a beautiful one. And I think certainly you will find out tonight that Thornwillow Press is living up to that challenge. So thank you so much for joining us again. And we are so pleased to collaborate with Thornwillow Press and bring this program to our society and to other lovers of the book. And now I think Phil, Luke, I'm sorry, Luke, you will follow me and introduce this wonderful work that you all are doing at Thornwillow Press.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you so much. It's really lovely to hear you talk about Morrison, having known her, and the images that were up on the screen were amazing. When you mentioned her redoing the cover and the dust jacket, that sounds very familiar to us here. It's you know, as you mentioned, Thornwillow is a printer and publisher of handmade limited edition books. Everything we make is made by hand. We do the typesetting, the design, the letterpress printing, which is basically the printing that was first brought to Europe by Gutenberg 500 years ago. And it's that idea that the ink is pressed into the paper and you can touch it and you can feel it. And then all of the binding is done here. We sew the books, bind them in different versions, which we'll show you in a little while. But it's kind of our paradise. It's our paradise of books. And it's this mission of teaching and perpetuating these related arts and crafts of the written word in an age, in a world that is increasingly virtual and increasingly remote. And there's always this analogy that in 1800 there was a reaction to urbanization, in 1900 a reaction to industrialization. In 2000, we have this reaction to technology. And now with COVID and everything that we've all been going through for the last year, even more remote and more virtual. And on one hand, that's incredibly powerful. And we are able to do what we're doing right now and bring almost 200 people together literally around the world and show books and show things and talk about things in this most powerful way. Yet, I think that the pendulum then swings, and the other side of that is you want to hold something, you want to touch it, you want to keep it. And that object becomes part of how ideas are preserved and passed on. I started Thornwillow when I was 16. I took a course in letterpress printing at the Center for Book Arts in New York. You can still take a course there today. The first book was a children's book written by a family friend, which I then sewed on the kitchen table and carried to bookstores and said, "Would you sell this book?" And they said no. Found a few stores that said yes. And then every year in college, made one book and was mercifully taken under the wing of my mentor in college, Roger Stoddard, who brought me into Houghton Library and the rare book library there, and from the first semester of freshman year was bringing out literally the Gutenberg Bible and the Nuremberg Chronicle, and seeing these books that were here centuries before we are, and will be here long after we're gone. And that idea that this object becomes the vehicle to transport ideas. So then, I remember just sort of writing blind letters. I wrote a blind letter to Walter Cronkite. It was the anniversary of the moon landing, and that was a subject he cared a lot about. And I think I was 18, and I said, is there any way you would possibly let me print a book by yours? And he said, well, we can talk about it. And I met him in his office, which was in this wonderful sort of 1960s skyscraper in Black Rock on 6th Avenue. And at the end of his office was a big bar set up, and it was 4 o'clock. And at 4:30, he said, it's time. And I said, well, it's time for what? And he said, it's time for a martini. And so he started shaking a martini. And probably everyone listening to this broadcast now is thinking it might be time for a martini. But and so he agreed to do this book. And then sort of a year later, the book happened, again, slowly setting the type and making this at what was quite a slender volume. And there was a publication party for that book. And I remember at that publication party when I was 18 or maybe 19 by that point, Toni Morrison came, and she was there. And I remember meeting her, and she asked me, how do you choose your authors? How do you decide what to do? And, in retrospect, I realized right then and there, I should have dropped to the floor and, said, please, you. But I didn't do that. I was in no way in a position to make a big, giant, fat book. I was able to do shorter volumes. But I gave her, which is true, but I gave her our story that, one book at Thornwillow has really nothing to do with the one next to it on the shelf there. It's a tapestry. The hope, though, is that this collection will somehow add up to more than the sum of its parts, and will be this kind of shelf that will carry the ideas on it, whether they're Walter Cronkite on the moon landing, or Henry Louis Gates on Frederick Douglass, or Jane Austen, or John Updike stories, or books on history, on the American presidency, or Barack Obama's inaugural address. The hope is that while one has nothing to do with the other, together they will say something about ideas that matter to us today, and carry that forward. So after I gave her my spiel, she said, well, what you print matters. and so kind of 35 years later, being able to say, well, we're now honored to print something that she wrote, is an incredible moment for us. I mean, it's been long in coming. The way we do our books, the way we make our books happen, is really an ancient model. We use the model of John Baskerville in 1750. When he wanted to do a book, he didn't just go to press and then hope that there were customers. He signed up his subscribers. He got people to he told them about their project and about his project, and then got them to sign up. And then when the book was finally printed and bound, their names were printed on a subscriber register in with the book. And so we do the same thing. The difference is that we use the internet. So instead of sending out letters to a small group of our immediate community, we use things like Kickstarter and our website and e-commerce. And we do an announcement, which is what is up right now, and which is kind of the catalyst for our having this conversation, today as opposed to 3 weeks from now, because we've just announced the launch of this new project, the first fine press edition of Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon, the first fine press edition of any of her books, which is, I find amazing.
Mhm.
But so this, is now live, and we hope that somebody more will come and sign up and subscribe to it and become part of this community that, that makes these books possible. And what's amazing is that it's a community that literally, is uniting people from Singapore and New Zealand and Australia and London and Paris and New York and San Francisco and everything else in between. Using technology, though, very much around the craft and around the craft of making these books. We were for many years literally scattered all around the world. We were in the Czech Republic because I was introduced to these paper makers who were doing incredible handmade paper. The communists did terrible things in Eastern Europe, but one thing they did that was good was preserve these crafts. And then there's another part of Thornwillow that was in England, where we were doing the leather work and the binding. And again, it was about following these amazing leather workers. And then the third piece was in Florida, where we set up an engraving workshop, because this guy who spent his whole life at the Bureau of Printing and Engraving and had actually engraved the Treasury building on the back of the old $10 bill, he helped us set up a little engraving workshop. And I blinked and I realized that, suddenly this little tiny operation was running like, Pepsi-Cola with global operations, which is unrealistic in the best case, but also not the dream. The dream was to bring this all together under one roof and have a project start as an idea on one end and come out the other end as a finished bound book. And so with that kind of catalyst to bring it together, my wife, Savine, who really runs the operation and makes sure things happen and happen on time and correctly and no boo, she put a compass on the map and drew a 1 hour radius around our apartment in the city. And that's where we found Newburgh, New York, which is where we are right now. And in Newburgh, which is the site of Morrison's short story, only published short story, Recitative, which takes place here, that's now our home. And we realized that we had to also get in the business of teaching and perpetuating these crafts in order to keep going. And so we've now have the Thornwillow Institute, which does workshops and fellowships and has programs that right now we have our West Point Fellowship, where the cadets are here working on projects to commemorate 9/11. A few years ago, we did a project with them for the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. We do workshops, we do classes. We have a wonderful partnership with Vassar, which is a repository for all of our work, and they're very close. And Ron Patkus, who's a dear friend and is a curator of special collections, which has, by the way, they have an incredible collection at Vassar that is just breathtaking, from Mark Twain and Einstein and goes and all these great poets. In any event, we kind of try to unite this community of people interested in books in our Hudson Valley region here, but then project it out to the world. With that, it's about kind of preserving these crafts. And my favorite story on that are these two young kids who we found several years ago, well, now 14 years ago, literally graffitiing their name on the side of our building. And they were putting their name and all kinds of special messages on the building, and they ran off. But the next day, their mother brought them back to apologize. And that was pretty amazing. And then after they were done apologizing, she said, so is there anything you could do for my boys? And I said, okay. And we ended up hiring them. And they started in the bindery folding and then sewing and then making a cloth binding and then a leather binding. And after 7 years of doing this, they were making books that are in the permanent collection of the White House and the Morgan Library and the Vatican. And long after we're gone, their work will survive. And that's, I guess, really this idea of making an object. An object is a thing. It's made by people who invest years of their lives to perpetuate those crafts and dedicate themselves to those crafts, or give a soul to a physical object, and it can pass that on, and it can bring that forward. And I always sort of make the analogy that a book is like a violin. A violin is a wooden box that exists between the reader, between the author and a wooden box that exists between the composer and the musician and the audience. And a book is the same thing. A book exists between the reader and the author. And that idea that you have this object that somebody wrote, the pages are in this, but how that book is made, how it feels, how you touch it becomes part of your experience with it. And so one of the things about this project is that you'll find out if you go to the Kickstarter page that talks about it. There are no illustrations. There are no illustrations, and Ford Morrison was very adamant about this wish of his mother's that you don't put the images in your reader's mind. You let the reader use their own imagination and create their own pictures, and they create their own images of their own imagination fills the ether of those words. So the only illustration that this book is driven by typography, it's driven by beautiful bindings, and it's driven by a fabulous portrait of Morrison on the frontispiece. And maybe there's a little video that shows a bit about how this portrait is done that maybe could run while we're talking. What it is it's a photogravure, and that's a copper plate. It's a 19th century process, a copper plate that is literally hand wiped and inked and then pressed into the paper. Here it comes. And this process is this portrait. I'll just first say is by Helen Marcus, who did this great portrait of Morrison. And you'll see there's a copper plate on the right, and it's printed on this etching press where literally each time it's printed, that plate is wiped by hand and rolled through the press. And it makes it very difficult to do large editions. So our editions are by definition small because there's so much craftsmanship involved in making them. But that if you run your fingers over that print, it's a three-dimensional thing. The dark sepia is literally three-dimensional. It's rising up at you as as you run your fingers across the page.
And that picture is in the book.
And that's the frontispiece opposite the title page, and that's the only illustration. And that's but then it's made up then of different versions. So in this kind of tradition of fine press publishing, there's a paper version, and I think we have a couple of images we can show of some of the different bindings that just kind of give a flavor of the different versions. But there's a paper wrapper version that I have one here, but there's also, I think we'll get better. Yes, this is better. So a paper wrapper which has the feathers. As we all know, the flight is such an important part of this story and this idea of taking off and escaping. So the original first edition also had feathers. But so here is on the left is the paper wrapper copy, which is still letterpress, sewn, hand bound, and then on the right is the cloth version, which is has a cloth spine and cloth corners and letterpress boards. And then the next one that's coming is the half leather version, and so that has a leather spine and leather corners. We're again channeling the her yellow from the original first edition in 1977, and those sort of waves on the cover are a paste paper. They're literally brushed and combed into the paper before it's glued down to the binding. And then on the right is another version in another form of paste paper that kind of has that three-dimensional textured cover. And so these are the initial tiers, and I think there was then a photo that kind of shows the set of them. Yeah. All the leather ones come in lots, but then we also have the full leather copies. So this one, this series is they're all named after different characters in the novel. This one is Guitar, obviously on the cover. I think this one is already subscribed, so there are no more copies of this one available. But then there's this one, the Making Dead. And if you remember from the novel, he's driving a Packard. And so the front is the Packard hood ornament that's stamped on the cover, and that's tooled in gold. And then on the back is a key, because he was, there's all these references to his walking around with keys and the houses that he was renting and giving people access or not. And then this is the Milkman. And so they get as increasingly elaborate as we go. This one is in this pale blue leather, but it's set, the M, whether it's Milkman or whether it's Morrison, you can decide, they're set with actual opals. So they're little cabochon opals that are set into the binding. And we're only making a tiny handful like this. And then this one is maybe my favorite. This is the pilot edition. And if you remember in the story, she has a brass box that she wears as an earring that has a torn page, section out of the Bible where where Pilate, from her name, she's named after Pilate. And so, and we actually made a little scroll that comes in this box. It's in the soft leather binding. There it is. And the passage that is in the Bible.
My goodness, this is amazing. So what are you going to do when everyone wants more?
Well, so that's a great problem.
Good problem to have.
It's a little bit when you have this kind of craft going into it, you can't just simply make endless numbers, right? So the way we do it is the leather ones are set with a maximum number before the project. The paper ones, we can do more of that edition, but even those are set in this particular project. And yeah, and unfortunately, if people want them and they're gone, then they're gone, and then they're, then it's left to the world of the secondary market and collectors and people to find them. But
I was going to ask really quickly here.
Yeah.
Dean Williams has our tech, and I was going to ask her, would she show the video? It was a video that you had prepared, and I was going to ask her to show it for us.
We're closed now, so this is a good way to see the operation even after hours when people have gone home for work.
Great.
I was gonna, I know we are somewhat short on time, and so I was gonna ask a few people, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, and we will take those questions for you, and I will give you all a second to come up with some, because I know I could ask some. I will say this though, and I'm gonna lose my card as a serious Morrison scholar, because all the serious Morrison scholars, they never try to rank the books, Carolyn Denard would never rank any of the Toni Morrison books, but I'm gonna say this. I have to say that I'm especially pleased the Song of Solomon is being the one that's gonna be printed. I guess I'm putting my cards on the table there. You all know how I feel about this book when I tell you, if you have to print one Morrison book, that is the book you have to print. Anyway, one of the questions in the chat is, do you plan, Luke, to print any other Morrison books?
That's a great question. We would love to, and I think we just have to get through this process. We only do a few books a year, so because that's, you know, we have two that we do, 2 or maybe 3 larger books a year, but the so it's to sort of to do them all, which would be amazing, is, you know, we'd be doing this for many years. But I'd love to do Beloved. I think that we need to do Beloved, whether we do that, you know, right next, or whether that's later, you know, in a pause. We'll have to see. And actually, you know, always welcome at the end of every campaign on Kickstarter, we do a survey that goes around and we ask people what they think. And so if you know, 100 people write in and say, we got to do this, then
it would be great for you all to next publish our second best book. That would be great. Anyway, hey, I ain't gonna get, I'm gonna ask the question. Clement King asked me why I said, now I've always been drawn to Song of Solomon. Is one of her books that I used to make these grand statements to say that it is objectively her best, but I realized, somebody pointed out, I think I thought about it, I think where you were when you read Morrison sort of shapes how you feel about books. And so people, when they talk about the books they read, I meet people who just go to town on The Bluest Eye, people who absolutely love Sula. So one of the things I started doing, people who love Beloved, I started asking them, hey, where were you when you read that Morrison book first? And so often I found that where people were is connected to the love that they have for a Morrison book. But I say that around Morrison scholars, and particularly the Morrison Society, you got to be careful, because they've read all the Morrison books backward and forward. And so you're starting something anytime you say that. That was another question.
President Obama's favorite book. He went, you know, that he said very clearly that was the book that sort of changed his life and got him thinking, not just about how to think, but how to read and how to think. You
said, who was that now?
President Obama.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that. He did say that. This one might go to Carolyn, but I think it could be a broad question. A person asked about when they thought about this book, Song of Solomon. They first thought, oh, here's another Christian novel. But then they started reading it, and their question was, what inspired Morrison to write this beautiful book, Carolyn, Song of Solomon, filled with a lot of paradoxes?
Well, you know, she says that in one of her early interviews, she said there are sort of, well, by then she had written Tar Babies. So she said there were sort of 4 stages, you know, that there's the self-discovery, the protest stage, I guess, or finding out about things that disturb you. And then there's the self-discovery stage. And then there's the stage in which you celebrate the myths and the stories and the folklore and the culture. And then, of course, she said, then you get to a conceptual notion of the ethnic experience. And so you, as she says, you've gotten all the way. So I think the wonderful thing about Morrison, and really the amazing thing, is she was very deliberate. So I think that she has a project every time, and she finished her project with The Bluest Eye. She finished her project with Sula, which was about self-discovery. The Bluest Eye about, you know, sort of a racial problem, as it were. And then I think in Song of Solomon, she really wanted to celebrate and uncover the myths, dust them off, as she says. And so I'm not so sure, and I think all of that is a piece. What happens in the Bible, what happens in African myths, what happens in folklore. I think that's all of a piece for Morrison of the richly textured culture of African Americans. And so I don't think she was setting out to write a Christian book at all. I think she was really trying to celebrate the textured culture of African-American life. And what a wonderful title.
I wanted to, I think there was a question on there, could they show the images of the books again? But now Dana, we're gonna see them, but Dana also put a link on the side. If you go to the Kickstarter link and just scroll down, you can see the various kinds of editions that they will have. But here they are on the side as well.
Right, right. Now, Howard, I don't think Luke answered why Thornwillow chose Song of
Oh, yeah.
Well,
What made you choose
that
Song of Song?
So that was definitely kind of this 35 years later, the fulfillment of something that I really wanted to do for a long time. It was definitely hard to figure out which title. Again, I'd love to do Beloved, but it seemed, exactly what Howard said. If we only do one, I just feel this has to be the one. But hopefully we'll do more. What we also did sort of as a parallel to this project, we did her short story Recitative in a chapbook. And that's the one thing that I feel is missing with Morrison. It's her only published short story. I wish she had done more short stories. Recitative is breathtaking. It's this great story. It takes place in Newburgh, as I mentioned, and it's again dealing with as you were saying, Carolyn, before about she was working on a problem with all of the books, and even in this little in this crystallized short story, she's she doesn't ever tell you which character. It's two girls who are orphans growing up in the orphanage, and she never says which is black and which is white, and it leaves it to the reader to just use their own imagination, right, and their own
clues that are keeping us
purely there. But why do you conclude one or the other? And she's clearly working with
stereotypes
and noodling on that. You can hear her noodling, but so why Song of Song? I think it was a must, and also this idea that if we do The Great Gatsby, and we do Pride and Prejudice, and we do Dante's Inferno, and then you do Song of Solomon, and you put it on the shelf with these other books, you're saying that this is part of the canon. This is something that needs to be here years from now, long after we're gone. This book needs to be picked up and held and read, and these ideas preserved, because it communicates about our time. And so often the fine press editions are another edition of Jules Verne or another edition of H.G. Wells, which is good, and I like to have an edition of H.G. Wells, but you also have to do editions of the ideas that are resonating now. And I think now more than ever, and everything that we've been experiencing over the last year is a moment where we are facing our history, the roles of our past, our ancestors, what they did right, what they did wrong, and addressing that. And this is all part of a canon, that things don't get forgotten and they get revisited, and you're always adding to the canon. I guess I would ask you, Howard, like what do you think, how does it happen? How does a book become part of the canon? How, we as publishers, we have our way, we make them, but what gets gets a book into the into that place?
Well, I think in many ways it often is about groups of people following a writer, writing books and articles on their writer, teachers continually assigning that book. And so I think that helps put things in the canon. It gets to this, the term I wrote down, I think I've heard before, but I stuck when Carolyn said, she says the kind of legacy work people do around a writer. And so, especially in the field of African-American literature, I think a long time ago, people decided Morrison and Ralph Ellison and Zora Neale Hurston, Richard Wright, Frederick, these were people we were going to do legacy work around. So I think there's this large thing of the canon, but then within African-American literature, it gets very particular. Langston Hughes, of course, I see Donna Keeper Harper here. So these are people, I think in many ways, at least when I think about Black writers, I think about scholars who've actually actively shaped canon formation and done that. I will say this with this book though, and I'm curious on what Carolyn thinks. For me, one of the weird things, and I know she has to feel this more and Dana even more, but it's so strange now for me to think about, because I spent so much of my life reading Morrison when Morrison was in the world. And so I always, when we lost her, I mean, I know she's here with us, but when we lost her, it felt so strange to me because she was, I always thought, hey, I'm reading this writer and she's somewhere, you know, she's out there somewhere. So this edition, when I get to Thornwillow, but it's going to mean a lot to me because it's going to be one of the first books I really thought. I mean, I've bought her books since she passed, but this is one I'm really consciously thinking about. So I wanted to know, Carolyn, what's that legacy work like for you now with an edition like this coming out? And just in general, what's legacy work mean for you with Morrison as the founder of the Toni Morrison Society?
Well, you're absolutely right. We really got spoiled. Toni Morrison came to all the conferences, and I'd have colleagues or students who would present at these conferences, and they'd say, "Oh my God, she just walked in the room," and so there they were, trying. I mean, I had that same experience myself, and so we got spoiled with her, or we got truly blessed. Maybe that's the better way to put it. We were truly blessed to have her in our midst. And the good news for us is that she left us so much, left us just realms of work and thought and artifacts. And so I think what the legacy work means for the society, and certainly means for me, is to mine that, to make sure that the next generation knows about this woman, to make sure that we continue to find these things that we had not, that we didn't have the time to study in quite the way that the Thornwillow Press edition of songs. I mean, think about that now. Now we're hearing the stories of the color of the dust jacket for love, and the letter that she wrote to a publisher to really mine this whole thing of what a book ought to look like and what it ought to say about the subject that she's writing about. So for me, she's still giving us questions, she's still giving us tasks. And so I know she's not here physically, but for me, I'm still so fully guided by her thought and her lamentations and her inspiration and her challenges to us. So that's the legacy work for me, is to keep unfolding the layers of her genius and to pass those on to the next generation.
Thanks so much. I wanted to ask, and this connects to legacy work, Luke, and I know our time, and so this might be one of my last ones.
Such a good time, Howard.
Let me make sure somebody doesn't have any more. I was going to say this about the, I was just so moved, Luke, when you were talking about these pieces, like when you talked about the necklace from Pilot, when you talked about the M with Milkman. I mean, just all of these details that the artifact is kind of trying to represent those books. So my question is, which might be a leading question, have you thought about any exhibits with like, even the Morrison, like a larger exhibit with showing these books? So, because some, they're going to sell out. I'm certain of that. And so I'm hoping that you all will keep some, and have you all even thought about doing more public displays of some of this?
And that's a great question, because, on one hand, especially with these very special, limited ones, which are so handcrafted, they're not, we simply can't make many, and then they end up in collectors' hands. But happily, a lot of them end up in institutional collections, whether that's at Vassar, whether that's at the Getty, or different libraries around the country that will put them into their collections and make them accessible. And that's, to make a book accessible so that people can touch it and see it and read it. This one actually that's on the screen now is, just as a quick aside, an interesting one. So we found a copy of the first edition on the right, which is signed by Morrison, and it's the true first printing, first edition. And then we've paired that with one copy that's bound, of our edition, that's bound together, and they come in a leather box together. And we it's been, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but it's incredibly difficult to find a clean, pristine copy. So I think we found a second copy, which which is good. So we may be able to offer a second, but I want to see it arrive first. So I'm expecting it to arrive later this week, and then that will be part of it. But to your point about accessibility, it would be great to do an exhibition. Vassar did a retrospective several years ago for Thornwillow's anniversary, and that was open to the public and people were able to see them. The Grolier Club did an exhibition several years ago. That's also open to the public in the city. And I hope there will be more. Please, anyone who wants to, let me know. And then the other thing though is that we want the editions to be accessible. So yes, there are these very high tier handcrafted, leather complicated bindings, but then there's the paper wrapper binding, which is they're expensive by normal book standards, but they're $95. And that, if you think that this entire book is handmade and letterpress printed and everything, they're intentionally accessible. At $95, they're below our cost of producing them. And we kind of, the fancier leather ones are actually kind of patrons copies. We even call them patrons copies because the people who are able to afford and subscribe to those are making it possible for the paper wrapper version to be priced where it is, and therefore more accessible to a wider audience. That's very important to us here, that we want these books to be beautiful. We want to always be pushing the envelope of craft and pushing the limits to what make them special, and challenging our binders and our printers in new ways. But we also want them accessible. We want people who care to be able to have a copy of this book. And so,
right. Luke, I want to say, since you're talking about the cost, we did have a question, or at least someone emailed and said, is this a fundraiser for the society? And I just want to make clear that no, this is not a fundraiser for the society, but we think that this work is so important. And as I said, it fits into our strategic programming as a legacy piece for Morrison. And so we wanted our society members to know about this and to have access. And that's really all that we're offering here, is the opportunity to purchase this first fine press edition of one of Morrison's novels. It's a unique opportunity.
The books are, in a way, when you say fundraiser, it's everything we do here is a labor of love. And there is the Thornwillow Institute, which is a not-for-profit itself, dedicated to teaching and perpetuating these crafts. But in a way, each and every one of our projects is effectively that, because we can't do this without our readers.
Well, I just meant for the society book. I didn't mean how you.
Yeah, no, I
just for the society. I just want to make that clear, that this is our introduction to Thornwillow Press is to serve our members.
Yeah, I will say too, though, and thank you for Sarah Butler placing. There is a membership, though. You can sign up for.
If you want to support the society.
Yeah, please. And I will say it in ways that I think Carolyn shouldn't have to. And I would say, please give a donation to the Toni Morrison Society. I would say that it's been a society that I found out about early on in my career, and just watching it from afar. And so I was so thankful when I was had in a position to participate. And this goes into a question that someone asked for me in the sign. They said, archivist for TMS. I'm gonna tell you, one of the big things that I think one of the big roles I can serve as the archivist of the Toni Morrison Society, and COVID threw that off. I think the number one thing is for me to interview more members of the Toni Morrison Society, starting with Carolyn, starting with Donna Keeper-Hopper, starting with people like Evelyn Schreiber. I mean, all of these people who've been following Morrison and this group for years, to me, that's really what's been fascinating as a member, to watch them. And I get to look at the old photographs and I see them in the early 90s and mid 90s. African-American literature, one of the crucial moments for the field was during the late 80s up through kind of the early 90s. I mean, you can say any moment is important, but those moments were so crucial for the field. 1987, actually, if you study it, and that's the year Beloved came out. And everybody knows this, but one of the crucial things that happened was Beloved did not win the National Book Award. And that set people off to really thinking about, hey, let's make sure we recognize Morrison more. One of the reasons people decided this is because James Baldwin died that year. And at the funeral, people were thinking about that. Wow, Black writers can be talented. They can do all of this. They can die and they not get their flowers while they're here. So I think collectively, people who study Black literature said, we will not let this happen with Morrison. And so one thing I'm always thankful of, we can talk about there are certain things we didn't do right. There are many regrets, but I think as a field, we're very thankful that we looked out for Morrison while she was here. We got to tell her that we valued her works, that we love her works, that we loved her while she was here. So I'm very thankful for that. So anyway, my thing as an archivist, it'll be to talk to people about what have moments like this meant when there were new editions coming out of Morrison's work. What was it like the first time you read Toni Morrison? So basically an oral history to me is one of the big things I think that I like to do. And this counts as just another moment in that process. We had promised though, and I love to keep this, I'm a student of Dana Williams, and she teaches, one of her lessons is to say, hey, you got to stay on time, dude. So anyway, we said we're going to do this from 7 to 7:30, and it is now 8 o'clock. So I failed in her class, but we're going to give you, this is not the last event we're going to do, I don't think, around this book. I think after it comes out, we wanted to do more, and we wanted to even show y'all videos of people making it. So I want Dana, you can close us out.
Thank you so much. And Howard, that's really funny. I only do that in meetings and wonderful events like this, where we have Luke Pontifell, Carolyn Denard, and we have a wonderful group of folks who are here to be attentive to all of the things bookmaking and all things Song of Solomon and Morrison. We can go a little bit over time. I think we're fine. We want to say thank you, of course, to the team at Thornwillow, especially Ariel, who provided us with the images, and to Sarah, who provided us tech. And I got to shout out Sarah's 7-year-old, who really helped us out at about 6:54 when we couldn't figure out how to make multiple people co-hosts. She came through for us. We had to go to the back of Zoom to make sure that it was set up the correct way, and like multiple licenses, and everyone knows with so many restrictions on Zoom, you have to be very precise from one account to the next one. So thank you to everyone on the Thornwillow team, really for giving us the opportunity to share this with everyone. One of the things that we talked about as we were planning this and really debating about whether or not to do it before or after, or something before and after, was I said, well, Carolyn, I don't know about you, but if I missed this edition and the Toni Morrison Society did not tell me that I had this option because there will be none available after the fact, I would be hot about it. So in about 2 weeks, Luke, Sarah, Howard, Carolyn, and I figured, what can we do? Where are the images that we can pull? What videos can we use to really get people involved and thinking about the way that books are made? And it just came together very nicely. And I'm so glad that so many of you are here and signed up. We actually decided to do it in webinar format instead of exclusively in meeting format instead of webinar, so that we could see your faces. So anyone who has not already turned your camera on, please feel free to do so that Morrison Society members can do so at the end of this meeting. And then you can also, safely driving, right, Evelyn, yes, driving safely, so that we can see everyone. I see Toru, who is on a completely different time zone. If he can be up and in with us and on camera, then everyone can. We want to invite those of you who are a part of the Kickstarter campaign and really have been following Thornwillow to be attentive also to the different programs at the Toni Morrison Society. We invite you, of course, to be members, but we also invite you just to follow our programming and to be attentive to what happens on the website. And then, of course, for our members, we really encourage you to take a look at the different editions on the Kickstarter site. The information is in the chat. It's there at the top of the chat and after, and we've made it so that you can save the chat, or you can just Google Thornwillow or Google find press edition of Song of Solomon, so that you can make sure that you have the opportunity at least to subscribe and to purchase one of the editions that will be available. I will end the same way that I began, but Howard, your time gave me the opportunity to find a couple of shots, so I'm going to take full advantage here. Here is if you all saw like my basement, you will know that this is what happens like all the time, like everywhere, these images from the archives with Morrison, where she's writing in this particular instance. And as I said, I'll start the same way that I ended, with a letter from Toni Morrison to one of the writers that she worked with, where she was talking about bookmaking. Here she says, this is just a little excerpt here. They're talking about whether or not Gail Jones needs an agent. And Morrison was incredibly generous with her time with her authors because she loved bookmaking. So Gail Jones had asked her, do you think that I need an agent? So she says, thanks so much for your note of May 31st about the agent. At some point, you'll need an agent very badly, but I suspect that this is not the time to acquire one. If your book goes well, and I'm determined that it does go well, many, many agents will seek you out. So Morrison really did the work of an agent for Gail Jones to make sure that she would get the full benefit of having an editor who was completely invested in her work. As she begins to close the letter, she says, I haven't examined the other material yet that you sent because I've been extremely busy, and also because I want to get Corregidor out of the way, because when Gail Jones first encountered her, she had boxes and boxes of manuscripts. So she says, and I want to know exactly what the next publishing venture ought to be. I have, however, approved the jacket, and it is very, very beautiful. One done by the same man who did the jacket for Sula. I don't know whether you agree with me or not, but I thought the jacket for Sula was lovely. I'll send you a sketch if I can get hold of one. In any case, you will receive proofs of the jacket when they're ready. Stay well, Gail. And that's what we say to you tonight. To each of you, thank you for joining us, and stay well. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dana, Carolyn, Howard, and Luke. Amazing.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Thornwillow.